welcome to this first EURADA Zoom webinar that we're organizing together with the UK Brussels-based innovation consultants of Artisans of Innovation. The webinar is entitled How the Cultural and Industries Can Lead the New Post-COVID-19 Innovation Economy. For those of the EURADA members that know me, nice to see you again. You can see me, I can't see you, unfortunately. For those that don't know me, I'm Tessa. I work for EURADA, the European Association of Development Agencies. So today we're having a webinar about culture, a very interesting topic for me personally, as I have an artist at home. For those of you who know, I consider culture to be the lifeblood of a vibrant society. It benefits the children's thinking skills, leading to better education outcomes. It fosters the health and well-being of elderly people by participating in culture. It has spillover effects, spurs innovation in other sectors. It acts as a type of glue of holding communities together. So I think it's very interesting, and I'm very excited that we have these fine experts with us. I'm sure that they will share some very interesting insights with us today. So first of all, again, some housekeeping rules. You have all been muted. Whenever you want to ask a question, you can do so by clicking on the bottom of your screen. There's like a symbol to raise your hand. When it's Q&A time, one of the panelists will unmute you and you will be able to answer your question. Of course, whenever in the webinar you have a question, you're always free to drop it again on the bottom in the Q&A section written, and we will take questions from the floor this way. So how does it look like? We will have a short presentation from these three fine experts, followed by a Q&A discussion based on the questions that you're going to ask. If at any time you miss anything, don't worry. The webinar is being entirely recorded, and one of my EURADA colleagues will circulate the link afterwards. So I have the honor of giving the floor to Mrs. Johanna Sowell, our first expert. She's the founding partner of Artisans of Innovation and specializes in cultural strategy, culture and external relations, and cooperation, transfer of skills and perspectives from creative sectors to business sectors, creative economy development, and innovation. A lot. I couldn't remember this, Johanna. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Tessa. Happy to have you all here with us this morning, and thank you also very much to Esteban Pelayo, who saw the importance also in the topic. So I just wanted to start by saying that, of course, then we have been looking obviously at all the questions and the answers having come in, and we have taken them, of course, into account when planning our small presentations. We will also send out a document to all of you with the main points from the presentations and also from the following discussions, also making a summary of the answers that have been coming in, because obviously that is interesting for you to see as well, what have the others answered. So some of you have maybe read the article, the blog post that EURADA posted with the registration link for this webinar about the role of this culture creative industries, CCIs, in the post-COVID innovation economy. So I want to just to say something brief before about Kawar, Peter and I, my colleagues who are online with me today. We have joined this initiative or company, Artisans of Innovation, because we are aligned in the same views and philosophy regarding the needs of perspectives across sectors, that there is a need of a more 360-degree view in order to innovate. So to see the world from a wider perspective, and this includes obviously to work with new people, new topics, new context, and to be confronted in what you are used to. So I think that innovation only comes from this newness, actually. A digital nerd has to understand a culture, and creative professional and a culture bohemian has to understand the banker, and so on and so on. We have never been so connected as today, digitally advanced, but on a human level, I think we're still isolated, and the sectors are still working in isolation. So how can we then enable the innovation to happen? So we are just trying to embrace this and manifest this through our work in AOI. And our experience come then from creative, cultural and digital industries. In the innovation economy, the cross-sectorial approach is central. And actually, the COVID-19 situation may facilitate for this innovation economy to prosper or to grow quicker, because you realize that you have to reinvent yourself everywhere. It's important everywhere in all the sectors. So we cannot afford any more narrow-minded vision. We have to keep specializations, but in all sectors, the more the perspectives are needed. So I just wanted to see if this now, just wanted to show you my talking points very quickly. Share screen. Does this work here? And I'm just looking share. I'm just showing to you my talking points. So basically flipping the coin, stopping victimization, and seeing CCIs from another perspective, intra and extra sectoral. How can CCIs contribute in innovation economy and cross-sector collaborations? How to stimulate cross-sector collaboration? What are the challenges? So I just quickly go back to my normal screen up. Sorry, I have some issue here with getting out of this. 1 second. Now I am back. Okay, so I wanted to start first saying that I think that the definition is super important when we talk about culture, creative and digital industries, the sectors. It is important to say that it's important not to exclude art and humanities and artistic disciplines. I think there is often, too often, you hear a focus on the audiovisual, the digital and the tech, and there may be some confusion around that innovation is mostly actually connected to those parts of the industries, but I don't see that is true at all. Because in the art and humanities, there is an important part of condensed human-centric innovation power. This is all about the skills that lie in these fields that are needed also in other sectors. So obviously right now there is a lot talk about structure, support structure and rescue packages for the CCIs. It is needed, but we also need to look at the contribution potential of the sectors. So we need to work on the valorization of the CCIs and to get them really recognized for what they actually present as opportunities. So I think also that the sectors really need to introspect and see themselves from a wider perspective and act upon that. So obviously for the valorization, the measurement is central. We have to continue to measure the economic value of the CCIs and also the social impact and the impact on people's lives, on well-being. But beyond that, we have to see how can we also be useful in other contexts, in the bigger picture. So how can, by looking at how CCI professionals can function in cross-sector collaborations, I see a lot of work opportunity, job creation and revenue generations. So how can CCIs then contribute in other sectors and in innovation? Again, this is really much about the skills, understanding the skills, the experiences, the perspectives that the sectors possess. And I think really important, understanding the culture for innovation that actually exists within the creative sectors. These sectors evolve around the creative process. They evolve around exploration. Without this, sectors wouldn't exist. And this is profoundly different from business culture or culture in business landscape. There are other values, there are other ways of thinking, there are other ways of being. They really need one another. So in the fourth industrial revolution, for example, that you all heard about, you know, the cognitive skills that are so much talked about, abstract reasoning, systems thinking, collaboration, experiment, empathy, creativity, and all of these are highly condensed in the creative sectors. So how can then CCI professionals contribute? I see various different ways of doing that. Both, of course, then in talking about wider context, advisory boards, in company boards, in research and development teams, in creating creative environments, and helping with alternative thought processes, perspectives, and projects. So I think that there are several objectives, for example, as increasing participation, activity, leadership, facilitating dialogue, communication, visualizing and embodying values. The creativity as such does not have to be an objective, because I think it's often also a byproduct, working with the creative professional through his or her way of doing things, working, or discipline perspective. So how then to stimulate these kind of processes, and what are the challenges? So I really think that the mindsets, again, we come always back to the mindsets and perspectives of people, siloed traditions. We have different ways of being, working, talking. We have different values. In business sectors, these perspectives of the art sectors rarely exist, sometimes never or not at all. And also within the creative sectors, we have to overcome the instrumentalization issue, that we actually, we can also have a focus on something else than our own creation, because we are interested in a bigger process that we may contribute to and contribute to innovation. So there are, of course, ways then of overcoming this. So this can be addressed in several ways. Policies, projects, programs, ecosystems. My colleague Peter will talk more about ecosystems. Education, artistic education and training really needs to be revised. This other perspective needs to be involved there too. Artist students need to engage around this perspective. In broader education, different kind of pilot projects. Also in culture management, these students need to understand how they actually can facilitate all of this and the importance of that. In business, in the cross-sector hubs, about exchanging, facilitating relations, putting in contact. But there also this wide expertise is really important. There need to be expertise both about the creative sectors and of other sectors in the business world. And CCI actors also need to be helped with implementation of these kind of approaches. And then, of course, government and policy, both financial incentives and support incentives are needed. Support of cultural brokers and incentives to companies to engage with creative professionals. So yes, that is for me my main points of this first part. So Peter, I leave over to you for the moment.
Great. Okay. Thank you, Joanna. I think there were some important points that Joanna raised there about cross-sector innovation. That is hugely important. But I think there's a few points that I want to pick up on from the questions that you all responded to, and I think one of the key ones is very much for the creative sector, for the creative industries. Its natural home is seen as being urban spaces, as being the city centre, and I think as we come out of, or as we start to move away from the recession and recover from this pandemic, I think we have to start engaging with a much wider geographical spread of the creative industries. I think we have to look at rural areas, semi-rural areas, some of these polycentric regions that perhaps don't have the traditional geographical look that we are used to with seeing city centres as being the natural home of the creative sector. It kind of responds to some of the work I've been doing here in the UK with a moving image cluster that I established back in 2017 called Platform, and that is very much based in quite a rural county and in a small city. One of the things we've tried to do there is to engage a whole range of different partners and to look at how the university can work with the creative sector as well in building an ecosystem. Because traditionally, universities, in terms of how they respond to innovation, how they engage with companies in terms of knowledge exchange, have struggled a little with working with creative sectors, working with creative industries. Universities have a really good understanding of how they work with science, how they work with engineering, how they work with technology in terms of what used to be called knowledge exchange, now perhaps more correctly termed knowledge transfer. But they've always struggled to some extent with working with the creative sector and understanding what innovation means in terms of creative industries. And I think the point that Joanna made, that it's not just about bits of technology, it's not just about widgets, it's about how we work, how business models work. So I think universities have got a much bigger role to play in creative ecosystems than perhaps they have done in the past, certainly. But in building that ecosystem, we need to work with those universities. And I think it's essential for regional development agencies to take a key role there in mediating between creative entrepreneurs and the creative sector and universities, so that academics and university executives can understand the challenges that the creative sector faces, but also that the creative sector understands that universities do have a role beyond just supplying them with new graduates. So I think that is something that we really need to look at in terms of how we build those creative ecosystems. I think one of the other key points that we have to look at is how we get finance into the sector. Traditionally, we've always seen creative industries responding to government funding. And I know this from having run a film production company for 10 years here in the UK, that a lot of what we do in terms of raising finance for our productions is we respond to government grant calls. We respond to the funding that is made available through either regional or central government. The issue with that is that when we come across these social and economic shocks, as we've seen with COVID, government funding quite often disappears from the arts and the creative industries first. And it leaves us then really struggling to build our companies, to build innovations and to grow what we're trying to do, especially, as I say, in some of these rural areas. So I think there's a really important part of engaging with the finance sector more than we have done perhaps in the past, to look at how we can engage with venture capital, how we can engage with angel finance networks, so that we can look at how we can get a much broader spread of finance into the sector to grow it, whether that's building infrastructure, whether that's growing clusters and ecosystems, or whether it's down to startups and seed funding and growth capital. The issue we have there, and again, I think this goes back to how the sector and universities and regional development can work together, is that traditionally that VC community and that angel community has viewed the creative industry with a little bit of suspicion. They recognise the talent that is there, they recognise the creativity, but they often see a lot of these companies as perhaps lacking in business knowledge. Rightly or wrongly, that is the perception that they have. One of the first things that we did with the platform cluster was to run a series of access to finance events where we brought different elements of financing, whether that's bank financing or VC or angel, together with our sector, and had a series of conversations around why creative sector companies were struggling to get that kind of finance. And I think there's two elements to it. I think the VC community and the finance community struggle to understand the opportunities in some creative sectors. They understand very much building bits of technology, building platforms, but I think they struggle with understanding arts and culture more. So I think we have a role to play in helping them understand that and seeing the value in that. On the other hand, many creative sector companies struggle to understand what it means to be investment ready and to understand the stages of finance that they can work with, whether that's from seed and pre-revenue through to growth capital and equity investment. So I think there's some really important elements that we can look at there in terms of how we grow these sectors and engaging what have been troublesome areas in the past for many creative communities. And I think it's that cross-sector work that Joanna talked about that is hugely important there, not just in the different industrial sectors, but by bringing in the development agencies, universities more, and bringing finance together. So I think there's stuff that we can perhaps talk about when we have some questions. And please do feel free to put some questions into the Q&A box, and I'll be moderating that after Kawar has spoken. So Kawar, it's over to you. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much, Peter. And just to reiterate, a very warm welcome to all of the attendees here this morning. Thanks for giving up your time to join us here. I'm going to talk for a few minutes about what we mean by digital and the context of this in terms of cross-sector innovation and in particularly the CCIs. I'll be using a number of slides as well, so I'll be doing a screen share with you in a few minutes, so hopefully you'll be able to see my slides and hear me. So we hear the term digital everywhere now. It's integral, it's a prefix, if it's a suffix. In fact, the statement is every business is a digital business and every organization is a digital organization. So digital has permeated through all facets and walks of life. So Joanna mentioned the fourth industrial revolution, and the emergence of the fourth industrial revolution really has been happening for the last 50 years really. But importantly, it's now characterized by fusion. The fusion of technologies, the fusion of the technology with human-centric elements, and the fusion of technologies across different sectors. So physical, digital, and even biological and human spheres. So that's what we're seeing today, so it cannot be ignored. Now, when you hear the term digital, typically what you might be hearing are things like cloud computing, Internet of Technology, AI in particular, data, etc., etc. So highly technical terminology. But actually, technology without application is meaningless. And it's absolutely crucial that we then contextualize the role of digital in terms of other sectors and the impact and the value which they have. Okay, so I'm now going to switch to a screen share. So if you just bear with me for 1 second, hopefully this will work. Okay, so hopefully you should be able to see my screen there. Okay, so Joanna mentioned the fourth industrial revolution, and typically, you know, this is about connections, so 5G, AI, connected systems. It says 50 billion here. In fact, by 2030, we're expecting 250 billion connected devices. We have cloud computing, robotics in conjunction with AI, connected systems and connected vehicles, and a whole range of contributing technologies. So typically, this is what we see and hear when we talk about digital and the fourth industrial revolution. And clearly, this seems very, very technology-centric and technology-heavy. So the fourth industrial revolution, surely it's not just about the technology, it's actually about the human, it's about the person and the role in enriching the lives of people and society and the impact which this creates. Now, this is a 10-second video clip. Hopefully you'll be able to see and hear. If you can't hear, I'll explain what this young lady is saying. Okay, I'm not sure if you heard that, but actually this is my 2-year-old grandniece, and she's actually trying to talk to the Amazon Alexa device. Now, okay, where's the novelty? Actually, it's far deeper and far more serious than a novelty. What we have here is a person who is yet unable to speak to other people, so unable to engage in human language, yet she is trying to engage in language with a machine and a device. This has significant impact now and in the future. So my question to delegates here is, what language will she be speaking with you and the devices and the objects? And what will she be interacting in? So the services and the products that you create through your industries, and what will she know through what you've enabled and the services that you provide, and her capability so that you can work with her. But fundamentally, how will you in the CCIs have contributed to the creation of her world? Now, on that particular point, let's go now back to the technology. This is very technology centric. So where are you here? How will you engage and interact with the other sectors, with the digital sector, in order to create that future world which we'll be living in? So in terms of cross-sector innovation, this is a very abstract, it's a very high-level diagram here, but this essentially is about our work in AOI. It's about fusion, it's about cross-sector innovation, and that magic circle is where it happens. So it's about concept, it's about changing how we see things in the world. For example, COVID-19 has resulted in a complete alteration of how we see physical bricks and mortar and building. We have decorporalized space. So we are here by not being here effectively through telepresence. The affordance is all about the human-centric impact. When we combine different sectors and different concepts, what can we create which is of value to people? We create the solutions, and this is what will give us the hyper-connected digital future. Now, my question, or another question for you, is where are you? So if we adopt this quadrant-based approach, the ideal is to be in the upper right quadrant called Digerati. So those who are ahead of the field in cross-sector innovation, in embracing digital, and in creating solutions for that hyper-connected future. So it's a good point for reflection on where you currently are and the level of investment, and Peter has referred to investment, in the industries you're in digital, the level of leadership which is required, the human-centric aspect, in order to become digerati in your field. So the convergence of the CCIs with the digital sectors to move collectively forward. Okay, so my last screen share with you is just some food for thought for you, particularly regarding post-COVID-19. And I call this Human 2.0. We see numbers on many things like Health 2.0, Health 3.0, CCI 3.0. Well, maybe post-COVID, what we will see is a rediscovery or a discovery of new human capability based on talent and creativity and self-actualization. So creativity could become a more highly valued currency in the future. And regarding self-actualization, we find now people at home, away from the norm, and they're finding new ways of doing things. So perhaps self-actualization will be something that we can review in the future. Okay, so that's the end of my screen share. I'm just going to end that slideshow. And stop that share. Okay, so that's just really a brief view of what digital means. And there's a lot more to that in terms of capability, education, skills development, which is crucial. And again, Peter's alluded to education. And this is about generating the next generation of pioneers who will create that hyper-connected digital future. Okay, so Peter, on that point, I'm going to hand back over to you now.
Brilliant. Carl, thank you very much. I think that's, in terms of the creative industries, I think understanding how the fourth industrial revolution applies to us is something perhaps that we struggle with. And I think there's a lot of work that we can do working with more of the digital community to understand some of those impacts. But I think what I'd like to do now is to move into a bit of a Q&A session. So if I can just again remind you, if you'd just like to pop any questions you have into the Q&A box. We have one there already from Esteban. Wonderful, thank you for sending that in. I think I'm going to just read out that question if you don't see it. So Esteban asked, following your experience, what measures could we implement in regional development agencies to support CCIs? Do you have any idea what we could bring into practice? Joanna, do you want to respond to that first of all?
Yeah. So do you hear me? Am I unmuted?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Yeah, great. Okay. So I would say then that I go back to my part from, of course, my perspective, the cross-sectoral perspective on how we can do something about challenges and to stimulate cooperation between the sectors. So, of course, there is a lot to do on policy level. This is, of course, very much connected to the practitioners level, but I would say in terms of incentives, regions, cities, do have, of course, an important part in putting into place incentives, supporting both companies, entrepreneurs and creative professionals and institutions as well, in both raising awareness, in creating financial incentives, and coordinating, trying to steer up conferences, meetings and matchmakings. So there are various things to be done within that, obviously, from different perspectives. And then, of course, always the local and regional context is very important to take into account. That would be kind of my first answer, my main answer. I mean, many incentives to create, policy incentives to create from regional policymakers, basically.
Okay, brilliant. I think something I'd like to add really is EURADA has the Beyond Entrepreneurial Development process stream of activity, and I think that is going to be hugely important going forward. You know, how we design innovation policy for the creative industries, I think is perhaps something that is slightly different to innovation policy for many other sectors. And I think one of the reasons for that is, as I alluded to in the points that I brought up in terms of how we see how innovation works, and understanding the range of partners and stakeholders that we can engage in that policy. And I think, you know, engaging creative entrepreneurs in that process is really something that regional development agencies can really get to grips with quickly and get that understanding of how innovation policy varies, I think, across sectors. You know, the creative industries and the creative and cultural industries are such a broad range of sectors, and trying to tie down a definition of that is quite difficult. So putting together an innovation policy that works for CCIs, given that it could be anything from computer games design and computer games programming through to arts, opera, dance, you know, and if you look at how some of the regions in Italy respond to what creative and cultural industries are, gastronomy plays a big part in that. So I think there is some work to do in understanding innovation policy there that I think really then helps to understand how we can put those policies in place to make a difference for the CCIs. Kawa, I don't know if you want to just respond to that as well, if there's any thoughts that you have in terms of how we can look at implementing digital technology into regional development.
Yeah, it's an interesting and a good question, Esteban. I think for me, it's partly about open minds and open innovation and embracing the need and the value of cross-sector collaboration in principle. But then the pragmatic intervention which is needed to implement that. I think there's intrinsic value in the CCIs and the codification of this in a transferable way, which other sectors will understand is absolutely crucial. So what do people think of when they hear about the CCIs? Now, there's a great deal to be offered there, but it can only be offered if it's translated and codified in a usable way for the other industries. So whether this is to do with raising the profile of CCIs, whether it's demonstrating the impact in alternative forms, whether it's exploring the high value organizational and sectorial impact in different forms. So I think it's really about reflecting on how CCIs are defined, translating and codifying the value in a meaningful way. I think the aspect regarding digital, Peter, that you've raised there is digital is a keystone. It's a pivotal aspect which underlines many, many things. It's an interesting aspect because on one hand, you have very human-centric, irrational, emotional human beings and, you know, the creative and the natural elements of humanity. And on the other hand, you have essentially finite state machines and digital. So we have a spectrum here. But really the art and the key here is the harmony and the congruence of combining these. And I think, you know, this is where that magic happens, that circle which I used in my slides. So to summarize, I think it's partly about reflection on the CCIs, codification, translation, and demonstrating impact in the right way. Okay, whilst I've got the microphone, I'm quickly going to answer or move on to the next question, which is quite an easy one for me to answer. And an anonymous attendee has asked, is there a relationship between COVID-19 and 5G tech? Now, this is an easy one for me. The answer is no, there isn't. 5G is the carrier of radio signals for communication. People are the carrier of the virus COVID-19. So there is no relationship between the two. There's no scientific evidence to support this claim either. Unfortunately, what's happened is we have fake news, we have the sensationalization regarding 5G, which has actually resulted in real kinetic impact on the ground, where 5G towers have been attacked, they've been burnt, and they've been vandalized, but actually there is no relationship between the two. 5G, in fact, provides an excellent opportunities for the CCIs because of the capability they will provide for data generation. And, you know, how will the CCIs work with the other sectors in leveraging that value of the data? And actually, people say data is the new oil. Well, I also say creativity is the new currency. And when you combine the two, there is significant potential. So 5G is good.
Okay, great. Just something you mentioned there in terms of data, Kawa. There's a lot of talk about the importance of data and how we use data, but where's the ownership of that data? So who owns that data that we're working with?
That's a really interesting question, Peter, because I think where we're looking at sectorial development and we have interaction between private and public sectors, then the question does arise, who or what generates the data? And secondly, depending upon origin, who then owns the data? Thirdly, what happens to that data as it travels through the data ecosystem? And as it travels, value is added to that data in different ways. So what you start off with could be fundamentally differently supplemented and augmented at the end. The question regarding who owns the data, I think that's partly based upon regulations, guidelines, governing data ownership and management. But actually, there's an unknown here because there are business models which have yet to emerge when we start to truly embed digital across sectors. So it's an unknown. And actually, this is where there is an opportunity for the CCIs to work closely with the other sectors to actually create the agenda and to create the definitions of that data ecosystem. Data ultimately will lead to monetization. There's value there. So there will be a race regarding the ownership and the governance of that data.
Brilliant. That's a really good answer, Kawa. Thank you for that. Just going to skip down through some of the other questions and see what we've got. We do have an interesting one here, which I think fits very well with what we do as a company, as Artisans of Innovation, which is how could we use the CCIs to facilitate the economic recovery of other industries? I think that's a really big question. Joanna, is that something you'd like to come in on?
I was looking at the next one, but I mean, of course, I could say something about this one as well. I think that, again, the perspectives and the underlying, if you break down the word creativity and you look at what it actually really is, I think that people in the creative sectors have a lot of potential and capability to come in contexts where they are not usually let in and take part in different strategy groups. We have to open up more in how we think about this. When we think about policies, when we think about strategies, we are used to work with the same group of people, basically coming up with the same solutions at the end of the day. So I do think that from, again, my real points about skills, experience, perspectives, I do think that the creative industry have a huge contribution to making that.
Okay, brilliant. And was there another question that you were wanting to look at?
I just looked at the question here from Xavier Ferrer, who were saying that there seems to be a need to create strong leadership in the context of creative industries. Why not develop a formal studies program in universities, a new kind of degree that combines technology, arts, and business management? Absolutely, yes. Of course, this has started to be done in some universities and at corners. However, this has to be universally addressed everywhere. And it is not just only, again, about technology, arts, and business, even though, of course, these are important parts. I was working some years ago with the German Goethe Institute, and we were working on an exhibition project about European identity. And as a part of that, we had a interactive lab for people coming and seeing the exhibition, and we had also different discussions and panels, and we had a collaboration between students in political science and in visual arts in actually analyzing the exhibition together, looking into a bit together. We had given, so it was a project that was created across 2 universities in Paris, and they were looking at, first of all, what did they have as experience also of one other fields in the past, what they had as perspectives and views on each other's fields. Then they analyzed the exhibition together, which is obviously which was very socially engaged and very much about reflecting the society we live in. Who are we? What is Europe really about? Etc., etc. And then it was another third step about reflecting upon the future. Students need, across all disciplines, learn to take into account much more than what the core of their study is. So absolutely yes on that question.
Joanna, I'd just like to add to that for a moment. I think in the creation of educational programs, there are 2 aspects. And I think for me, the most important element is embedding higher order cognitive abilities, pedagogy, in the construction of educational content and courses. So for example, the World Economic Forum, they talk about 21st century skills. I think there has to be a deep embedding of the creative thinking in conjunction with these skills at the deepest level. So it's not just about the courses which are taken, it's about the deeper embedding of those higher order cognitive skills, which the next generation will need as they start to live in that hyper-connected digital future.
Exactly.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting point. I think there's a real understanding now that, as you say, the skills that we're going to need in dealing with the technology as it's advancing is actually perhaps not strictly technological skills. It's, as you say, that higher order thinking, that creative thinking, that critical thinking, to some extent almost going back to what was a classic liberal arts degree in the past, and using the skills there. So I think that question around leadership is going to be really important, because we are moving now into a situation where, certainly from my point of view in how I work with my company, you know, the skills that I would have used as a filmmaker, as a producer, as a writer, those quite traditional creative skills have to be matched now with a real understanding of digital platforms, of distribution and production that is very much technology based. So I think there's a real mashup happening here of digital skills, digital leadership, transformation with the cultural and creative industries, and the ability to bring those critical skills to it. It's a really interesting question. So I'm just going to very quickly skip down and see what ones we have. A few questions around finance. There's a good one here, perhaps, Kawar, for you, about a MIT publicised an article last week. They were stating that COVID has blown the myth of technology as garage innovation. The question, is it a good moment to associate innovation with something else, like social, creative innovation or non-technological innovation? As somebody that comes from that background, how do you see that? How do you see the fact that perhaps we've always associated innovation with science and technology, and what does that mean as we move forward?
Good question. So thank you, Alexandra, there. I think there's almost an interesting naivety when we talk about technology and digital, and that's because as people, we're amazed by it, Peter. So what tends to happen is we tend to associate innovation with technology, because technology is the thing which directly and immediately affects our immediate spatial context, where we are, what we do, and how we do it. It's fundamentally altered how we function. That's why we are constantly fixated with technology and the definition of technology in parallel with innovation. So we sort of assume that actually, if we're going to innovate, then technology will be at the heart of that innovation. But that doesn't have to be the case. You see, interestingly, technology tends to work. The days in the 80s, 70s, 80s, and some parts of the 90s, you know, where we were plugging and playing and trying to fix, I think they're over. There's now flow and fluidity, and it just tends to work. So we are now embracing this as the norm. So if we're embracing this as the norm, it can then start to alter the shift of focus in how we think about innovation. And people are amazing creatures, aren't they? You know, amazing beings in terms of their thinking and their creativity. So I think we do have to stop thinking necessarily about technology being a integral part of innovation. We know it's going to be. So the question is, how do we think about innovation? If you look at some of the large global models, and they're always good to refer to, so Uber, Amazon, Just Eat, etc. Actually, what they have innovated upon are things like human needs, the geographical, the spatial, and the temporal context. They've actually gone back to fundamental concepts, re-architected these, and then integrated technology within these. So I think, you know, post-COVID-19 is a good opportunity to hit the reset button in many ways, to rethink how we think, and to accept technology as the norm, but look beyond that in terms of alteration and formation of human behaviors, value, and impact. Now, the other interesting aspect here is agility, because everybody can become an innovator, whether you're 5 years old or 95 years old. So it's a low friction, easy entrance to many, many markets out there now. And much of this is facilitated by technology. But going back to what I said earlier, what's the point of technology if it doesn't add value?
Very good point. Very good point. Joanna, did you want to bring something in there?
I actually wanted to, there was a question just prior to that, I think in the order. Okay. If you want to comment on what Kawar said, please go ahead. Otherwise, I just respond to the two worlds of business and CCI, this question.
Sure.
Yeah. So can you provide concrete examples on how to bridge the gap between the two, especially in terms of actions to finance for CCI? I think that this question is a cultural question. It's a cultural question in the sense that we are talking about two different worlds. We are talking about different cultures of being, of looking at things, of looking at values, and we have different languages. We need to, I think, look at confidence creation, awareness raising, and creating events and conferences that really invite people from the both sectors. I attended recently, there were 2 conferences in Brussels. I always go to Back from Davos, which is something run by European Business Summit. It's about looking at what were the key topics and trends at the World Economic Forum in Davos. And then the other one is something that was organized by the European institutions called the Creative Flip. It was about funding for the culture and creative industries. And I just realized, sitting in these 2 conferences, so extremely different audiences. They were talking differently, they were dressed differently, but it all evolves around the same problems. It evolves around the challenges of innovation and the challenges to funding, to entrepreneurs, even if it's an entrepreneur in whatever sector or if it is within the creative industries. And we need to organize events really where these come together and where we have the cross-sectorial really at the heart of it and how we can help one another. And I really believe that it really comes from first, starts at creating the confidence, creating the common language and understanding potentially what different values are there in the sectors and why are these values so different? How do we function? And how do we measure impact? So it all will start from there, I think. Yeah.
I mean, that was a question that I'd seen. I think there was one as well a little bit further down where somebody was talking about a point that I've raised about the perhaps the lack of understanding of finance in some creative industries, and I think that is very much, speaking as somebody who's spent 30 years working in the creative industries. We want to create. That's why we got into it. We want to create. We want to be making things or writing things or building things because that's what we do. We don't really want to sit in front of a spreadsheet and think about budgets and where we're going to spend our money and profit and loss. Mm-hmm. However, if we want to attract finance to grow our companies, then that is what we have to do. So I think, Joanna, you're absolutely right. There is that, perhaps that cultural gap that we need to work at bridging. And it's something that we did with the platform cluster, where we did those access to finance events that really were just conversations between the finance community and the creative community. And I think once we got into those conversations, people started to realize, oh, well, this is why I haven't got any funding into my company. It's because I haven't done this. And on the other hand, the members of the VC community that were there were seeing, oh, well, actually, there is opportunity here. If these people can understand the business side a bit more, I can see that there's an opportunity for me to invest. So I think that, that's a hugely important point. And I think in terms of we need to bring those 2 cultures together, if we can, to generate that kind of cross-sector but cross-cultural dialogue and understanding. I'm aware perhaps that we are getting close to time, so I'm going to perhaps just ask Kawa and Joanna, if you'd just like to make just a couple of minutes of comments as a wrap-up, really, to what we've talked about today, and some of the things perhaps that we can take forward as a creative and a digital community, as perhaps some actions that we can take forward. Kawa, do you want to go first?
Sure, I'll keep this brief. I think the aspect regarding polarizations of business and CCI, the aspect which Joanna's just referred to, I think this is all about breaking down borders and barriers. And through post-COVID-19, decorporalization of physical barriers through telepresence, actually what we have is we have a easily accessible, geographically diverse and talent-rich set of human capital out there. You know, this telepresence call, for example, you know, we're reaching out to people in many, many different countries, different cultures, different communities, yet we are converged here and now. And I think there has to be a realization that the breaking of borders and barriers can be done. It does take some leadership, it's possible, and there are some real benefits and value at the end. There's a rainbow and there's a pot at the end of that rainbow. All we need to do is coordinate, lead, orchestrate, and follow that path.
Brilliant. Joanna, would you like to add to that?
There are many things to add, and I think we will add it obviously also in the document. But what I maybe want to say is that it is important that we all go beyond our own specialization, again, that we go beyond our old field, that it is important to see the bigger picture. And this can be more complicated than one thinks sometimes. And it definitely takes more time and effort than most of us understand to actually truly understand from a cross-sectoral perspective of how we could function together. So again, there are so many things to be done, both from education level, from business level hubs, and from policy and government levels in this. I had wanted to say something also about how culture and creative and digital can be leveraged in external relations for cities and regions, but I will write something brief about that also in the document that we are sending out. So thank you from my side.
Okay, Carol, brilliant. So I think we'll wrap it up there. It is now 10 o'clock. I'd just like to say, from the point of view of Artisans of Innovation, thank you to everybody that's attended. I think we've had around 60 attendees, which has been fantastic. We will try and respond to all the questions that came through. I apologise we couldn't get through all of them, but we will send out a summary document that gives you kind of the main talking points and also responds to some of the points that perhaps we didn't address. Please do feel free to share any other questions or comments or points that you'd like to make. If you email Joanna at artisansofinnovation.com, we will use that email address to coordinate all those responses, and then we'll try to respond to those in the document. And I hope then we get a chance to perhaps talk again in the future, and it'd be really nice to meet in person in the future. What a novelty that will be. So we'll look forward to doing that. And Tessa, I'd just like to hand back to you and say thank you very much to EURADA for organising this.
Well, thank you from our side as well for wanting to share your expertise with us. It's very interesting. I think I'm going to have creativity as a currency on my brain for the rest of the day. Thanks, Kawar, for putting that on my mind. I also want to thank, except for the speakers, of course, the entire audience for taking the time to attend this meeting. I want to encourage them, because this is the first webinar for EURADA, but in these post-COVID or almost post-COVID times, not the last one for sure. The next one, so they will have to check their social media and stuff like that, will be one on investment promotion agencies, and it will feature Bureau van Dijk and Mrs. Carolina Alicada, which are very high-level speakers. And then the EURADA summer course that we were normally going to organize from the 1st until the 3rd of July in Brussels will also be held online. We hope to see many of them again. And also our speakers, if you have anything to add there, you're also always welcome to join us for those as well. Thank you everybody for your time, and hope to see you next time. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.